So what's this one thing that helps keep your art career going? For me, it's workflow. I'm gonna show you a quick tutorial on how to stay moving in a program that I use that keeps me building quickly. So workflow is this really strange kind of aspect of being creative. How to make something from the beginning, kind of get it to the middle stages, and then get it to the ending stages. And it's not an easy thing to do. I think over the career of being an artist, you start to develop different ways of working, but sometimes tools and technology can help, and sometimes they can get in the way. I have a lot of different tools that I use, but I kind of have some go-tos in order to get a concept off the ground and into the working space. One way is to get a sketch on Procreate. Another way is just to get a sketch on paper, take a photo of it, get it into a program like Photoshop or Clicky, and just do a basic paint over or a layer underneath. I think after that step, I'm just kind of collecting different versions on the way to what I want to do with the final version. So Google Photo Albums are where I organize ideas that are kind of half done or in a direction that I want to keep moving, but I don't want to lose track of what I have. I'll make a photo album and start to keep things there and leave it until I need it again later. It's a really good way to organize your thoughts and not lose it. And hey, you have access to it on your phone, so if you find a picture that goes with your project, you can add it that way too. So always keep a sketchbook in my backpack or something like that. And then I use notes on my phone. Those are a couple other tools that I think are worth mentioning. All right, and we're back to our line art and what the next step is with Clicky and this version of building to a palette. I have it in there. I'm going to pick out a palette because a palette is definitely part of a kind of professional workflow. And then by using a palette in the beginning, you are also limiting yourself and keeping yourself kind of on track creatively so that you don't end up with a giant, huge, kind of one-of-a-kind thing that you can't kind of rein in later. So it's okay not to use a palette, but palettes can help you limit and make boundaries around whatever the new concept that you just thought of. So I paste a palette into Clicky in this space, and then I'm going to start to kind of go in and start to paint and lay in the basic colors just to see what it looks like. And this is a very early stage in the process of making something from just the line art into something like a painting or a graphic. And if you keep track and download and save different versions of these things as you're moving, this will help you also know, because sometimes early versions actually are the best versions, so it'll help you keep track of some of the best thoughts that happen at the very beginning. So right now I'm looking at I'm just going in with the greens and just kind of thinking about what values I want to have, how to make the face show up, how to make it stand out from the background, and just kind of filling in those basic colors. And I think over time, I've realized at different times I'll try different programs or different ways of working. But the best way for me is to get that basic sketch into some sort of like a notebook or something, and then take a picture of it and make different copies of it over time. So another topic I want to touch on is the idea with all these new technology tools and Adobe Photoshop coming out with the next update and learning more and more and more about vector art, and you're gonna the further you go into your art and design journey, you're going to find there's 1,000 different ways to do everything. And this is where workflow becomes really important, because if you think that that next best tool is going to like change and make or break your career, my experience is over the last 10, 15 years is that you're the special person, you're the special thing that's going to make or break your career. No tool is going to take away or add all the things that you're struggling with. So there are tools that are part of the industry that you are going to have a knowledge of, and some tools are going to be better for you than others. Some are going to really enhance your work. Some of them might slow down your workflow and might kind of not help you. And the only way to really know is to kind of try things out and see how it goes. Photoshop is important, of course, but it's more important to understand what Photoshop does, the values, the brightness, the contrast, the selection tools, the masking, because at the end of the day, what you're doing is more important than how you're doing it. And understanding what you're doing will help you plan out ahead of time what your original artwork looks like. So really good line art is essential to getting into the direction where you don't have to edit or you don't have to recreate something that you've already made. And when you have a lot of pieces that you've saved over the years, those things will help you make new artworks. And you can also use those things for print. You can look back at your portfolio and see how you built something. So documentation of your workflow is really important in that way also. Some of my favorite pieces of art that I like to look back at are the projects that were challenging, but I also kept really good documentation and labeled everything really well, so I know which layer goes on top of which layer and where the transparencies are, all types of things like that. So just keep that in mind, that you're gonna find moments where you feel like, boy, I really wish I had this, or I wish I had Procreate with the Apple Pencil. And those things are fine to work toward. But I think sometimes you learn the most by struggling with the equipment and the boundaries that you have at the moment. So I think it's super important to have multiple ways to get your work done, multiple programs. You have your go-to equipment and you have your go-to things that you always use, but you have to have backups, and some of those things just need to be super simple. So one of the ones that I use is Clicky, because it's online, it's always there. Another one I use the iPad with Procreate, and then Photoshop and all the Adobe products are there if I need them. But sometimes you aren't in a place where you can get to that stuff, or you don't have time to sit down and spend 45 minutes. You need to get a quick thought out, and then you can use your journal or some sort of, sketchbook to get things moving. But I think it's important to be able to be flexible and multiple ways to get the idea out. So those are just a couple tips while I'm thinking about it right now. So in that same breath, there are times where you're going to have to sit down and know your workflow about certain types of things that you're doing and know how long they take. I think when I first was doing design and illustration, I sometimes would underestimate how long something would take, and I would communicate that, oh yeah, I could do that, no problem. And the longer I've been at this, the more I can estimate how long something actually takes to get to a level where I'm happy with it. And that takes time, but also just honesty of the complexity of a project. So if you have an idea, or a client comes to you and says, I want it to look like this. And you look at it and you're like, well, that's going to take like 20 hours of work. And they only want to pay you for 5 hours of work. Or you don't have 20 hours to spend because you have 13 other projects to do. That's an important thing to know as a freelance artist or a freelance illustrator. And even just working in a design studio or even in art school, when you have multiple projects going on, it's important to know what you can finish and what you need extensions on and how long something's going to take. Sometimes you'll be pleasantly surprised, but it's worth keeping in mind. So Clicky, coming back around to that because that's what's playing in the background. The reason I like it is it's always available online at the moment. It's free. It's got all the basic things that you do in Photoshop. The only thing it doesn't have is a selection tool that is as powerful as Photoshop. So shading and some of the other things that you can do, and just the layer controls and masking and all that is way just simpler. But as far as getting a sketch done and being able to save it quickly and just as a PNG transparency type file, it's very quick and it works exceptionally well all the time. And being able to use it in browser is one of the fastest things I've ever been able to pull up, get started. And for me and my style, I'm also aware that my ideas, when they move quickly, tend to keep the energy that I started with. If I lose momentum, the idea often will kind of die with the loss of momentum. Some people aren't like that, so some people have the time and the patience, and their workflow is slower, maybe more methodical, and that's okay too. You kind of just have to know for yourself what works the best for you and keep track of things that way. This particular illustration was fun because it started out as just some basic line art that I was kind of doodling around. I took a photo of it, brought it into Clicky, turned the brightness and the contrast way up so it was just line art, and then I just started filling it in with the paint bucket. And then later on, using just another layer and the paint tools, going in and adding some shading to just make it more of a finished illustration, playing with the color. And there's a gradient tool that's nice inside of Clicky that's just been added. So I hope that helps you develop and be aware of your own workflow and kind of start to think more about what is your process and how do you keep that going.